And welcome to Lecture 3 from Chapter 26. In this final lecture, I'll be talking about using enharmonically equivalent diminished seventh chords to effect a modulation from one key to another key. What I'd like to show you first is how a particular diminished seventh chord can be respelled to make three different diminished seventh chords in three different inversions. On the board, I've started with a B diminished seventh chord in root position. I've marked the note, which is the root. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take each note in turn, and I'm going to treat that note as the root of a different diminished seventh chord. But as I write them, the chords are all going to sound the same, and they're all going to use the same keys on the piano. The difference is simply going to be a difference in enharmonic spelling. Here is B diminished seventh with B as the root, D the third, F the fifth, and A flat, B seventh. Now I'm going to treat D as the root. So we'll have D, F, and A flat. And instead of having a B, I'm going to make a C flat. So we have D, F, A flat, C flat, and what this is a D diminished 4/2 chord. The next thing I'm going to do is treat the F as the root. But here's a little tip for you. It's very difficult to use a flat note as the root of a diminished seventh chord. You're going to wind up with double flats and maybe even triple flats. It'll be horrible. F is not a flat note, but F is a note that's way over to the flat side. So instead of calling it an F, I'm going to call it an E sharp. So we have E sharp. The A flat I'm going to rewrite as a G sharp. And we'll have a B. And we'll have a D. And what this is an E sharp diminished seventh chord in 4/3 position. And finally, I'm going to treat the G sharp as the root. The root will be G sharp, and we'll have B, and we'll have D, and we'll have F natural. And this is a G sharp diminished 6/5. I have each note being used once as the root of the chord. And by doing that, I get all different inversions. I get the 7, the 6/5, the 4/3, and the 4/2. And these are all chords that sound exactly alike, right? Here's the first chord. Okay, here's the second chord, now with a C flat. Okay, here's an E sharp diminished 4/3 chord. And here's the G sharp diminished 6/5 chord. You can see and you can hear that they are all the same. The B diminished 7 would be 7 diminished 7 of C. The D diminished 7 would be 7 diminished 7 of E flat. The E sharp diminished 7th chord would be 7 diminished 7 of F sharp. And the G sharp diminished 7 chord would be 7 diminished 7 of A. Because the roots are each of them a note of the diminished seventh chord, it makes sense that the notes that they tonicize, which are a half step up from each root, these tonicized chords themselves spell out a diminished seventh chord: F sharp, A, C, E flat. Okay, let me throw a little more general theory at you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so here's a little handout that I made up, which is also available on Canvas. And what I have here is not the circle of fifths. What I have here is a circular representation of a chromatic scale. So as we go clockwise, we're going up a half step from C to C sharp, to D sharp, to E, to F sharp, to G. And as I go counterclockwise, I'm going down by half step from C to B flat to A to A flat to G flat. Inside the circle, I've inscribed 3 different squares. This square, which uses a dashed line, shows you the diminished 7th chord that I was just talking about. It uses the note B, the note D, the note F, which by the way is also E sharp, and the note G sharp, which is also A flat. So we can look at each one of these 4 notes as a potential root of a diminished 7th chord, but all 4 of them would be enharmonically equivalent. The solid line is used to connect the notes F sharp, A, C, and E flat. There's no way that this diminished 7th chord can be made enharmonically equivalent to B, D, F, A flat. This is a distinct, non-enharmonically equivalent diminished 7th chord. But again, any of the notes could be used as the root of the chord. We could have F, A, C, E flat. We could have A, C, E flat, G flat. We could have B sharp, D sharp, F sharp, A, or we could have D sharp, F sharp, A, C. 4 different diminished 7th chords, 4 different spellings, but 1 sound. And then finally, the dotted line shows you the 3rd square, and that includes the notes G, B flat, D flat, and E, or F flat. There are only 3 enharmonically distinct diminished 7th chords. The one that's shown with the solid line, the one that's shown with the dashed line, and the one that's shown with the dotted line. However, each one of these 3 diminished 7th chords can exist with one of 4 different roots and one of 4 different enharmonic spellings. Down below, I've listed the possible diminished 7th chords. The solid line I'm characterizing as diminished 7th chords that include C. And here are the different spellings of the diminished 7th chords. The diminished 7th chord that includes the note C sharp or D flat is shown with the dotted line. And again, there are 4 different possible roots. And then finally, the dashed line shows you the diminished 7th chord that includes D. And there are 4 different possibilities for that, the one that I put on the board. So I hope that you'll spend a little bit of time with this handout and come to understand it completely if you don't understand it based on my rather quick introduction. I'd like to turn next to a couple of examples from the textbook. We're going to be looking at example 26.16 and example 26.17. And both of these illustrate the enharmonic reinterpretation of diminished 7th chords as a way of making a modulation. Here's example 26.16. Where the excerpt starts, we are in the key of G flat major. Okay, and by measure 94, we're on a 5-6-5 chord. This is D flat, F, A flat, and C flat. Interestingly, we move from a strong dominant chord to a slightly weaker dominant chord, which is the 7 diminished 7. This has almost the same notes. It has an F in the bass. It has a B natural, which is the same note as C flat, and it has an A flat. But instead of having the D flat, it now has a D natural. And if you think about it, a D natural is enharmonically equivalent to an E double flat. So what this chord really is an F, A flat, C flat, E double flat chord, which is 7 diminished 7 in the key of G flat major. However, the way that it's spelled in this measure accords with its function in the key of C minor. It is spelled B, D, F, A flat. So it is also a 7 diminished 4-3 in the key of C minor. And the 7 diminished 4-3 goes to 1-6, which then goes to a 5-4-3, which then goes to a 1. This is a fairly clear example of using the enharmonic reinterpretation of a diminished seventh chord to make a modulation. And in this case, the modulation is between two keys whose tonic notes are a tritone apart. Let's listen to this example. The next example is a little bit more complicated, and we're going to have to figure out some of the harmonies ourselves in this example. Here we're modulating from C major to E flat major, but we're not told anything about the way that the modulation happens other than that it's an enharmonic reinterpretation of a diminished seventh chord. But notice that in measure 15, right before the key of E flat major is signaled, we do have, right at the end of the measure, we have this chord, which is a diminished seventh chord. It's an F sharp, A, C, E flat chord. And we also have this chord in measure 14, F sharp, A, C, E flat. This chord is not 7 diminished 7 in the key of C major, and there's no way to enharmonically respell it as 7 diminished 7 in the key of C major. How would we identify this chord in the key of C major? And I'll give you a hint, which is that the spelling of this chord, F sharp, A, C, E flat, reflects its function in C major. It's not the primary 7 diminished 7 chord, but it is a secondary leading tone chord. This chord is a 7 diminished 7 of 5. It's tonicizing G. Now let's think about how this chord allows us to get to E flat major. Here in measure 16, we don't have an E flat major chord. What we do have is a cadential 6/4. Well, I guess you could say it's an E flat major chord in second inversion. But then the real chord that's of significance is this B flat major chord, which is 5 in the key of E flat major. Is there any way that this F sharp diminished seventh chord can relate to the B flat chord in measure 16? Think about different ways of spelling this same chord, F sharp, A, C, E flat, and see if you can make it make sense as a chord that leads to B flat major or B flat dominant seventh. If we think of A as the root of the chord, it's an A, C, E flat, G flat chord. So its alternate enharmonic interpretation is as a root position 7 diminished 7 of 5 in the key of E flat major. Instead of going to a G chord, which would be 5 in C major, it goes to a B flat chord, which is 5 in E flat major. And then the 5 chord is prolonged throughout the next measure as well. Here's what this example sounds like. This concludes my discussion of enharmonic reinterpretation of diminished seventh chords. We'll be doing a lot more work with this method of modulation in class in the days to come.